I'm Officer Tiffany Driscoll with the Boulder City Police Department. I have worked for the Boulder City Police Department for almost 10 years. 7 of those years I spent working child abuse, elder abuse, and sexual assault cases. So I just barely transferred out of that unit. So anyway, I guess that's why I'm teaching this class. I have the most experience in these kind of classes. And this is a video that basically just shows a high school principal who failed to report a child abuse case, and she was going to jail now.
Charlotte County boy may have been spared witnessing his mother's murder if his teacher had done what she was supposed to do. Investigators say 8-year-old Peter Huss told a teacher at Mayaka River Elementary School his stepfather had held a gun to his head and choked him, but she never reported the abuse. And just a few days later, he watched his stepfather stab his mother to death. NBC2's Chris Gilmore tracked down that teacher, who explains why she did what she did.
I feel like I did anything wrong.
But in 2007, just days after Carol Zeroff learned of domestic abuse in her classroom, Scott Huss murdered Yana Huss, the mother of one of Carol's students, Peter. According to the state, Peter told Zeroff that his stepdad choked him and held a gun to his head just days before the killing. Zeroff says the student never pulled her aside.
No, he never came to me one-on-one. I just overheard it.
She also says that's the first time she heard of any abuse at home.
Children say things all the time. You don't know whether to believe them or not because they like to tell stories.
Records show that Zeroff did not bring the abuse to anyone's attention until after the murder. The Board of Education responded to Zeroff's actions in 2008.
They came back with a statement basically that they were going to take some action, and it could be anywhere from a letter of reprimand to revoking her teaching license.
It took more than 6 years, but the Education Practices Commission came to a decision somewhere in the middle. Zeroff's teaching license will be suspended for 5 years. She'll be fined $500.
You do put this in your mind, and everyone you deal with, where it's something that this kid went through some horrific things.
The state says it took so long to get a decision because Zeroff's attorney had a hard time communicating with her. In 2009, Zeroff says she retired for medical reasons. She doesn't plan on teaching again. Reporting in Charlotte County, Chris Gilmore, NBC2.
Everything we talk about today is important not only for the victims of abuse, but also for your own personal benefit, because if you fail to report stuff that we talk about in this class, you can be criminally liable, okay? And also you'd probably lose your job. We'll get into that though, okay? These are the class objectives. I'm not going to read each one. We'll go through each one separately, okay? What is a mandated reporter? Does anyone know? Guess?
Somebody that assumes that something's happening or knows that something's happening and fails to report it? Or?
Okay, so her answer was somebody that knows that something happened and fails to report it. That's kind of close. Go ahead.
Any teacher or anybody that works with children.
Very good. So, Debbie.
Yeah.
Debbie stated any teacher or people that work with children. That is correct, okay? This statute, our Nevada revised statute, specifically defines a mandatory reporter, and it states any person who in his or her professional capacity knows or has a reasonable cause to believe that a child has been abused or neglected. So in your professional capacity, meaning at your job, you find out or you know that a child is being abused or neglected, okay? You're a mandated reporter because of the job that you hold, okay? Also, this applies for elder abuse, okay? Same thing, that an older person has been abused, neglected, exploited, or isolated. We're going to define what all those things mean, okay? What is reasonable cause? The NRS states has reasonable cause to believe. What do you think reasonable cause is? Anyone? Yes?
Evidence of abuse, like bruises, stuff like that.
Absolutely. So he stated the reasonable cause is maybe evidence of abuse, bruises, and stuff like that. So reasonable cause means basically that a prudent person or somebody who sits on a jury, somebody looking at your situation who's prudent or has common sense would reasonably believe that abuse is occurring or neglect is occurring, okay? So all of you are prudent, reasonable people, okay? So if somebody like you believes that something might be occurring, that's what would then trigger your requirement to report, okay? So the way that reasonable cause is defined in statute is to have knowledge of facts which, although not amounting to direct knowledge, would cause a reasonable person knowing the same facts to reasonably conclude the same thing. Can somebody put that in layman's terms? No? Okay. Basically, what we just talked about, a reasonable person seeing that set of facts that you know about would think that abuse is occurring or would think the same thing. So, it says it doesn't amount to direct knowledge. So say that you don't see the bruises directly, but Mary told Sally, told Tasha, told you that so-and-so child had bruises, okay? And thinks they're from abuse. Does that mean that you're still required to report that? Even though you heard it fourth hand? Yes. Okay. It doesn't amount to direct knowledge, but it also means that a reasonable person would think it's true, especially if you feel like your information is reliable. At the very least, you'd want to investigate it further to see how valid it is, and we'll get into that, okay? Bottom line, if you hear about it, suspect it, or if there's any likelihood of it going on, report it. Okay? A mandated reporter is a person who, now we talked about, Debbie mentioned certain professions make you mandated reporters. That's absolutely true, and that's why you're all sitting in here. So any EMT, paramedic, firefighter, medical personnel, okay? Coroner, clergy. What's clergy?
Pastors.
Yeah, pastor, preacher, okay? Employed by a facility that provides care or organized activities for children. Ding, 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 ding. Is that all of you? Yep. Foster home licensee, law enforcement, that's me. Attorneys under certain circumstances. So everyone in this room, you understand you're a mandated reporter, meaning you are required by law to report instances where you believe abuse, neglect could be occurring. Okay? We're going to get into what abuse and neglect is so you guys have a better understanding, okay? Yes?
That doesn't include psychiatrists?
It would include psychiatrists because they are considered medical personnel. So yes, if you tell your shrink that you molested somebody, your shrink is required to report it. So that would not be confidential. And we do get psychologists that report to us, okay? Most psychologists make you sign a waiver when you first become a patient that states they're required to report something like that. How soon must we report? Anyone?
When did you find out?
Very good. As soon as possible or within 24 hours. Okay? Who can we report to satisfy our legal criteria? Guesses? Police, that's one. There's one more. For children. CPS, Child Protective Services. Okay? Can we tell our boss? Does that count? Have we fulfilled the requirement if we tell our boss? Nope. So we should tell our boss, definitely, but we also should be telling law enforcement and CPS. Okay?
Can I interject for a second?
Do you want this? Yeah, I was going to talk about that right now. So I talked to Patty and Roger this morning about how they want you guys within their umbrella to do the reporting. And what they want you to do is contact Boulder City Police Department, okay? So you'd call the main dispatch line, okay, or 311, and you make the report that way. Every time you call into our police department, the line is recorded. So understand that, okay? So rather than calling the CPS hotline right away, they'd prefer that you call the police department. But either one would satisfy your legal requirement and get you out of being criminally liable for not reporting, okay? And then once you make the report, tell your supervisor about it, unless the supervisor's like a suspect or somehow directly involved in the case, at which I would tell their supervisor. Okay? Same thing for elderly people. Senior Protective Services takes the place of Child Protective Services, okay? These numbers are all on the internet. You can jot them down if you want. I'm sure that Patty has them if you need them, okay? Senior Protective Services, somebody qualifies for them if they are 60 years of age or older, okay? This is for fire people. Okay, what happens to you if you don't report? Go ahead. Very good. You probably will get fired. What else? Yeah.
You can be charged with neglect or some other criminal.
Very good. You can be criminally charged. Okay? The first time is a misdemeanor, meaning a minor crime. The second time, it's a gross misdemeanor. Okay? And then there's felony, which the first time misdemeanor, second time gross misdemeanor, both of them you can actually do jail time. Will you? Probably not, but you'll definitely get fined and fired. Okay? Employee discipline up to and including termination. What's the city policy for mandated reporting? The city doesn't have one because it would be redundant to our laws. Okay? It's not under city policy report, it's under Nevada state law. And obviously we have to comply with Nevada state law as employees of the city. Okay? What is child abuse neglect? Anybody? Go ahead.
Physically harming a child is probably, or verbally abusing them possibly.
So physical or verbal abuse, that's good. That would be one. What's something else that might be child abuse or neglect? Okay. So again, our statute, our law defines what child abuse neglect is. Somebody want to read this for me? Actually, since we're on camera, I will read it. A person who willfully causes a child who is less than 18 years of age to suffer unjustifiable physical pain or mental suffering as a result of abuse or neglect, or to be placed in a situation where the child may suffer physical pain or mental suffering as the result of abuse neglect. So, you're committing abuse or neglect if you deliberately inflict pain or suffering, or if you allow a child to be put in a situation where they're getting abused or neglected, okay? Generally, the next paragraph of the law kind of defines that a little bit more. It says, if you're responsible for a child's safety, your mom, your dad, your babysitter, okay, you have a caregiving right, and you allow that child to be put with somebody who's going to abuse or neglect them, then you have committed child abuse or neglect. So where I see this a lot in my profession is you got mom and mom's boyfriend, okay? And you have child, okay? Mom leaves the house to go to work, boyfriend abuses the child, okay? And I'm not picking on male, female, it happens with girlfriend too, okay? Can mom be charged if she knows it's going on for child abuse? Yes. Absolutely, and the last lady I arrested for this got 5 years in prison. Okay, these slides are disturbing, okay? They are very disturbing. If you don't want to see them, close your eyes, but I recommend that you look at them only to make you aware that, first, that child abuse and sexual abuse does happen, because sometimes we get a case, we go to trial, a juror doesn't believe us because they don't possibly believe that somebody's capable of doing something like that, okay? I'm showing you these pictures so you know that people are capable of doing horrible things, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so that being said, if you still are disturbed or you don't want to see it, you can close your eyes, whatever, I won't say anything, okay? If you want to, last class somebody cried, that's okay. It's kind of disturbing, all right? The first type of wounds we see a lot are cigarette burns, okay? Okay? So most of the time on the hands, parents use it as a form of punishment, or sometimes they're just high or drunk or whatever and they do it to be mean. Okay? Scalding burns. This is the most disturbing slide in this whole presentation. Close your eyes if you don't want to see it. A scalding burn is when somebody submerses a child or anybody in really hot water, okay? Boiling water, or the water heater all the way up, okay? We've seen some parents use this as a form of discipline, and this is the result. Okay? What you're going to look for, obviously, is reddening of the skin. You guys know the difference between first, second degree, third degree burns, right? A lot of times they sit the child down in a bathtub, okay? So the buttocks that actually touch the tub, which is cooler, the skin may not be as red, but around it, it's called a donut burn is what we call it, because the middle's not burned, but all around it's super red, because that's the part that touched the water, okay? Bite marks, sometimes inflicted by other siblings, okay? But if you do see bite marks and there's no relevant story, I mean, that needs to be reported, okay? Petechia due to strangulation, okay? So what this is, and I'll tell you when I put the picture up, okay? I'm going to explain to you what it is. When you choke somebody or strangle somebody, okay, the blood in their head can't get back to their heart. It gets stuck in there, okay? So the blood vessels start to burst in your head, okay? And it causes these weird red dots around eyes, in eyes, sometimes bloodshot eyes, okay? That's what the picture is going to be, and I'm going to show it right now. See the red dots? Red dots.
Are they alive? Okay, so those other two babies are alive?
So I obviously have pictures from my own cases here over 7 years. I chose not to show any of them because I don't want any to show somebody that y'all might know, okay? I got all of these off the internet. So I don't know if these kids are alive or not. My guess is the one on the left is not. Okay, most common belt or cord marks, okay? Right there. Anyone recognize the picture on the right? Do you guys remember who Adrian Peterson is? The NFL player? That was his son. Okay? This is the most common thing you should watch out for. Now, question, is it illegal to use a belt on your child for discipline?
No.
Correct, it is not. It is legal. Where it becomes illegal is when we're leaving lasting wounds or lasting marks, longer than 2 hours. So a wound that doesn't heal or doesn't go away in 2 hours, sometimes you spank a kid, they might get a little welt that goes away in 15 minutes. That's legal. I don't want to say that's okay, but you're okay under the law, okay? So what I tell parents that use the belt on kids, because we get called on this frequently, if you use the belt, you don't leave marks, be careful, because you can't control how hard that belt is hitting or how hard that cord is hitting. My recommendation is if you feel like you absolutely need to use corporal discipline or physical punishment, you use your hand, because you can control how hard a hand hits. But when you're flinging a belt, you don't know if it's going to leave lasting marks. And if it does, you're committing child abuse. Okay? Does anyone have questions about that? Wound identification. Spanking and other lasting wounds caused by the hands. Okay? So every little kid, you guys work with kids, every little kid gets bruises from playing, right? They get a scratch, they get a Band-Aid, they get a cut. So just because you see something like that on a kid doesn't mean they're being abused. But if you see it in any of these places, be mindful. The backs of the thighs and knees. Why do you think backs of thighs and knees would be common? Because when you're trying to spank a kid with the belt and he's squirming around, are you always going to hit the buttocks? No, probably you're going to get back of thighs too. Okay? The neck, upper arms, bottoms of feet, inside of hands, and the genital area. Okay? Is everyone still with me? I know it's disturbing. As a general rule, if parental discipline, again, is leaving lasting marks more than a few hours, it's child abuse. Okay, we're going to talk about sexual abuse. Okay? There's two forms of sexual abuse as our Nevada state statutes defines. The first one is sexual assault, basically meaning if you subject another person to a sexual penetration, or you make them penetrate you, or make them penetrate an animal or another child, that's abuse. So that would include oral copulation, oral sex, vaginal intercourse, or anal intercourse. Okay? Anything like that that's forced on a child is sexual assault. What is the legal age of consent to sex in Nevada?
16.
Very good. 16. Okay? So if you're 16, you can have sex with an adult. Consensually. But you don't have to. Very good, Julie. But if you're a 15-year-old and you have sex with a 19-year-old, guess who's going to go to jail? The 19-year-old. Okay? Even if he didn't know how old you were, or she. Okay, so the other type of sex crime that we normally see, there's more, but these are the main two, is lewdness. So lewdness is anything that doesn't amount to sexual assault, like forced touching, okay? Or basically anything that doesn't amount to a penetration. So both of these are felonies. Depending on children, both of them are felonies, okay? Go to jail long time. Yes?
You can get lewdness if you go to the bathroom outside.
So Debbie's question is good. Can you get charged with lewdness for using the bathroom outside? The answer is yes, but there's a better statute called indecent exposure that we would use for that. It's about the same degree. Indecent exposure is a gross misdemeanor, so it's a little bit less.
But if it's in front of a child, it's different than if it's in front of
Yes. If it is in front of a child, it's different. A child under 14 specifically. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. What if we show a child pornography? Is that legal? No. But it doesn't fall under either of these two. There's a specific statute for it. Okay? It's called distributing pornography to a minor. Okay, what about what I see all the time is high schoolers that send nude pictures of themselves to each other on Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram. Is that legal? Nope. Even if they are 17, okay? So if the way the law is written, if I'm a 17-year-old, I can have sex with the 30-year-old. But if I take pictures of myself and send it to that 30-year-old, he's going to get charged with possession of child pornography. Okay? Because the threshold for that is 18. So I see this all the time. School calls me, hey, we impounded somebody's phone and she has pictures of her 12-year-old boyfriend on here or her 14-year-old boyfriend on here. So I talk to the kid, where'd you get these? Usually the criminal liability comes in when it wasn't consensual. Say that I send like revenge porn. Do you know what I'm talking about? So say that I'm 16 and I send a nude picture of myself to my 16-year-old boyfriend, and then we break up and then he sends it to all his friends. That's usually when we will get involved and make arrests, although it is illegal to even have it. Okay? So both of these, sexual assault and lewdness, constitute child abuse and should be reported. Okay? What about child pornography? Since we already talked about that. Should we report that? Yes. Okay. Signs of sexual abuse in children. Okay? Obsessive masturbation. You know what prepubescent means? Before puberty. You expect that generally people that have hit puberty masturbate as a normal part of life. Okay? Whether you believe that religiously or not. That's not necessarily a sign. Okay? But if they are 8, 7 years old and they know how to do that, that's a problem. Okay? They write, draw, play, or dream of sexual or frightening images. Now, just one of these by itself may not be an indicator, but I want you guys to look at the totality of circumstances. If they exhibit a lot of these, okay? They develop a fear of certain people or places, refuse to talk about a secret, especially with the little ones, okay? They talk about a new older friend. They suddenly have money, toys, or other gifts with no reason. You know why they would have that? Why would that be an indicator? Bribing. Very good. We call it grooming. Same thing. Children that come from a lot dysfunctional families, or sometimes functional ones, the abuser will do an exchange. Say, if you don't tell mom about what we're doing, then I will give you an iPad or whatever. And a lot of times that's enough to keep these children quiet. They think of themselves or their body as repulsive, dirty, or bad. Exhibits adult-like sexual behaviors, language, and knowledge. Should a first grader know what sex is? Is that normal? No. So if they're telling their other first grader friend about sex, then we kind of go, huh? How do you know about that? Okay? Pain, discoloration, bleeding, or discharge in the genital, anus, or mouth. Ask other children to behave sexually or play sexual games. That's really, really common. Almost every child that's like under 8 that's abused, sexually abused, will act out on their friends because they think it's normal behavior. And they don't understand.
If you have just one of these, do you call the police?
I think you use your own judgment. Does that make sense? I would say, like, develop a new unusual fear of certain people. Well, that may not necessarily be in and of itself. I mean, some kid might have had a bad dream about a place and now they don't want to go there, you know. It just depends on what it is. But I would say if they're behaving sexually or playing sexual games, then yeah, I would question that. So it just depends on which one. Remember, we talked about reasonable cause, what a reasonable person thinks. I expect all of you to be reasonable and think, does this look like abuse or not? We don't need to call over every little thing, but when in doubt, call. Okay? Wetting and soiling accidents unrelated to toilet training. Usually if they're 6 or over is where we really take this into account. But even then, some kids have underdeveloped bladders or still have wetting problems. That, in addition to some of these, would maybe raise a red flag for you. Okay? Okay, so we talked about abuse. We talked about sexual abuse. What's the difference between that and neglect? Go ahead.
Where you knowingly place the child in danger of abuse.
That's a good guess, but no.
Is it like not keeping them clean and stuff?
Yes, so not keeping them clean. That is a form of neglect, okay? So there's different kinds of neglect. Neglect doesn't mean you're hitting or hurting. It just means you're not providing for a child's basic needs, okay? Usually you're not going to get charged with neglect unless you have a direct caregiver status over a child, okay? So your mom, your babysitter, your dad, your aunt that takes care of the child, that's when you can get charged for neglect if you're a main caregiver or a caregiver in general, okay? So physical neglect, failing to provide food, shelter, or supervision. Medical neglect, when we don't take the child to a doctor when we should, okay? Educational neglect, habitual truancy. Our kid keeps skipping school and we're not doing anything about it. That can be child neglect, okay? Or more often we see young children where mom and dad are pretty transient and they're not registering for school like they should, okay? Emotional neglect. This one is really, really hard to prove, and I've actually never prosecuted a case on emotional neglect before, although it exists, okay? Lack of supervision. So sometimes the police department will get a call. There's a 3-year-old running down Utah Street in the middle of the day. We catch the 3-year-old, we figure out where he goes, and mom's passed out drunk in the living room, okay? That's neglect.
How old are they allowed to be at home?
12 is your general age of when they're allowed to be home, but that doesn't mean the 12-year-old can take care of 7, 5, and 3-year-old. But I think it depends on the maturity of the 12-year-old. As a parent, you need to be prudent. Would I charge a parent that leaves their 12-year-old home alone with their 6-year-old to babysit? No. Unless that 12-year-old has some type of special needs or there's a definite reason why they shouldn't be babysitting. I'm sorry?
Appropriate supervision.
Appropriate supervision, right. Okay, So now we're going to talk about old people crimes, but I'm going to go through this, and I say old people because elder, sometimes people get confused. I'm going to go through this quickly because most of you are just around kids in your job, okay? Basically, everything we learned about child abuse and sexual abuse on children is the same for elderly people that need care, okay? Older person is defined as 60 or over in statute. Laws are similar to children. The only difference is there's two components called isolation and exploitation. Anyone want to wager what those are? So say that we have grandma, okay? Grandma gets her Social Security and a pension. Grandma's not all with it, okay? And we have daughter who decides that she wants to spend grandma's Social Security money and her pension on her gambling problem. Okay, so she locks grandma up in the back room of her house and spends all of her money and doesn't take care of her. That would be isolation because grandma's locked in her room, and exploitation because she's using grandma's money not for grandma. Okay? So you have mandated reporting requirement for those cases as well. The only difference is you're going to report to law enforcement or senior protective services instead of child protective services. Okay? Signs of elder abuse. Pretty similar to kids, okay? Bruises, welts, or scars. Clustered marks from repeated striking. Scratches, cuts, pinch marks, choke marks. These are all the same things you're going to look for in kids, okay? Broken bones. Now, elderly people do break their bones a lot easier, especially if they have osteoporosis. So just because they broke their hip doesn't mean they're being abused, okay? Again, we're looking at a totality of circumstances. Signs of being restrained. This is for kids too, especially special needs kids. Do you guys have special needs kids in your programs?
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes we see restraint marks on special needs kids at my job because they're so hard to control that they restrain them. Is that necessarily child abuse? If it leaves lasting injury. But case-by-case basis, report it anyway, let law enforcement decide if it constitutes abuse or not. Daughter's not letting us see grandma. Okay, that's a sign. Unusual weight loss, malnutrition, or dehydration. So we're not feeding grandma like we should, okay? Sometimes elderly people do self-neglect, meaning they live by themselves. They may want to die, so they don't eat. Or they may not be all with it, so they don't eat. Okay, we obviously don't charge them for their own neglect, but they do need help from senior protective services, okay? Maybe need to be not living alone anymore. Bed sores. Does anyone know what bed sores are? You guys are kind of young. Okay, so when you lay in one place for too long, it restricts your blood flow in your bony parts of your body, okay? When the blood flow is restricted, you can get a bed sore. We'll talk about all this stuff is, again, I'm going to go through it quickly. So early stage bed sore, just redness. Late stage, it becomes necrotic, meaning the skin starts to rot and they smell, okay? Disturbing picture ahead, so turn your head if you don't want to see. These are the commonplace: head, shoulders, basically bony prominences on our backside, okay? Most commonplace is the tailbone, okay? So this is what happens when you get a bed sore that becomes necrotic. Okay, see how the skin's rotted away, okay? Okay, you're safe, you can look again. Financial exploitation we talked about already. This is the most common elder abuse crime I investigate. Because kids don't want to use grandpa and grandma's money for grandpa and grandma. They just want it for their own reasons, okay? Any questions about what we've talked about? Go ahead.
Would bullying be considered child abuse?
Bullying?
Yeah, like if another kid is bullying another kid. I mean, I guess it wouldn't be child abuse, but would it be abuse?
The question is, would bullying be considered child abuse? And usually kid on kid, no. If it becomes really bad, like substantial injury or like where we have substantial bodily harm, then we may charge a child with battery, but it wouldn't be considered child abuse if they're pretty much the same age. Usually, like we talked about, child abuse has to be inflicted by a caregiver. Usually. Not always the rule, but generally. Okay? Anybody else have any questions? So do you guys feel like if you see any of these signs, you have all the information and resources you need to report it accurately? Is there any cases you can think of or something you saw this last week that you're thinking, man, I should have done something about? If that's the case, let me know after this class, okay? All right. Again, our goal is to keep all of our kids safe and also make sure that we are not being liable for things that we're not doing, okay? Thank you guys for participating. That's the end.
Thank you.